Hey everyone, welcome back. Welcome back. I love doing these interviews. Thanks for sticking around. I've got an interesting guest with me today. And without any further delay, let me introduce her. Today's guest has a passion for the great outdoors and a personal resilience journey. She's become a beacon of hope for many seeking to embrace nature's beauty, irrespective of physical constraints. Her dedication to accessibility in the wilderness has led her to author several acclaimed Easy Walks guidebooks, catering specifically to those with mobility challenges, older walkers, and parents with young kids. Her most recent work, My Liturgy of Easy Walks, is a memoir and a meditation on adapting to a changed life, filled with insights and strategies for finding hope in a world that can often feel overwhelming. She's a sought-after voice in media, offering her expertise on accessible trails and outdoor experiences, having been profiled by the likes of the Boston Globe and WCVB TV's Chronicle News magazine. Beyond her books, she's a seasoned developmental editor and book coach specializing in nonfiction and topical memoirs, helping others to bring their stories and experiences to the forefront. Please join me in welcoming Marjorie Turner Hollman. Welcome, Marjorie.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Robbie, for having me. It's a joy to be here.
You are in my sort of former hometown area of Bellingham, Massachusetts. Thrilled to have you on the show. This is a show about building strong networks, and the context is leadership. So tell me, how do you define leadership, and when did you realize you had the skills to lead?
I think leadership is, for me, leadership is doing what it needs to take to get to where you need to do, especially when nobody else seems to be doing it. If you see a need, you realize that you're the one that can do something about it. Don't wait for other people. Just go on and do it.
So sort of like stepping into the void. There's an empty space there that someone needs to bridge and make happen, or else it just doesn't get done. So seeing a need, stepping in to make it happen. When did you first start realizing you had some of those skills to step into that kind of leadership?
In my own experience, it has been when things aren't going right. And I don't know if anybody else relates to that. For me, as I was thinking about this interview, I remembered when I was facing divorce. I had two very young children, aged 2 and 6. Had been an at-home mom, no job, no car, no money to claim as my own, and found myself in the middle of a divorce. And I kept hearing myself saying, somebody's got to be the adult. And that was what I was faced with. It wasn't an easy thing. I sure didn't feel much like an adult. And I had to keep making choices for my children's sake that nobody else was making rational choices. So I got to do some adulting, as hard as that might be. That was, I think, when I first started doing responsible, active, hard, and important leadership.
Yeah, adulting in that kind of scenario sounds like a very hard thing to do. No matter how great you have been prepared for it, I'm kind of curious what your upbringing was. So when you were, take us back to when you were like a kid in the playground, what kind of kid were you? Were you organizing your friends, sitting back and watching? Did teachers see a lot of potential in you? Did you run for student office? Like what kind of kid were you?
I was a follower. I was really happy to follow the older kids. I did not want the younger kids asking me to do things. It was really not a comfortable place. I was always out on the playground. My sister says that's why I wasn't at the library, to get told where books were. No, you were always out at the playground. So I guess I always enjoyed being outdoors. But nope, I'm one of 5 and right in the middle, and I was not the leader. I was very, very content to have other people do that.
And did you join activities and clubs to kind of, because you had various interests? Was that part of as you grew up?
I was a Girl Scout.
Mm-hmm.
Lots of us were Girl Scouts, very active in our church youth group, had a I didn't run for any offices. I did not have real good, I didn't know how to make friends. I really was, I don't know if I was shy. I really didn't know how to take initiative to say, hey, I'd like to get to know you better. Do you want to do something? I know as an adult now that that's something that's okay to do. It was not something that I felt comfortable. I always felt like other people needed to take the initiative and then I could respond.
Hmm. When you were about 12 years old, did you have a sense of what you wanted to be when you grew up? Was there a path laid out by circumstances and family? Was college part of the equation? Like, where did you
Mhm.
think was going to happen over the next decade when you were 12 years old?
My family is a very strong advocate of college. Both my parents were college graduates. It was an expectation. It was just understood that we would all go to college, that we would all finish. Didn't really matter what you studied, but you needed to make that investment in yourself. So that was in my extended family. We all knew that college was really what we were headed to, and from there the world was open to you. Um, so that, as far as what else I knew at age 12, I still don't always know what I'm going to grow up to be. It's yeah, the plans, the goals, the changes, that it's been all over the place. If I had had a here's my goal, it would have been sidelined 20, 30 times in the life that I've ended up living.
Well, that's true for most of us. I was just kind of curious what the original thought was, right? Like when you were thinking about going to college, was there, and particularly as you got closer to that happening, was there particularly a plan, like the type of
Hmm.
degree, the type of work you were drawn to, or aptitudes you had?
Actually, now that you ask me that question, it brings to mind when I was about 12, I heard a psychologist come and talk at our church, and I thought, wow, I'm a good listener. That's what I should do. When I got to college, I took my first psychology class, Psych 101, like lots of people do, and I immediately experienced the phenomenon lots and lots of people do when they take medical, any kind of those kind of classes. I was convinced that I had every single issue that they talked about. Here's this problem, here's depression, here's, anxiety, here's all the, any particular psychological deviation. I just thought, I'm all of that. It was really alarming. And then my second thought was, I don't think I can take abnormal psych because I'm really going to be sunk. And so,
Oh my.
and so I said, maybe I'm not so cut out to do that. I think I better explore some other options, which is probably a good thing. I sometimes, having done counseling myself, I realize sometimes a lot of what a counselor is doing is listening to a lot of whining. And I have a pretty limited capacity to listen to whining. So it's probably just as well that that's not what I ended up doing.
What were you drawn to next as you were exploring career paths?
The next thing I thought was looking into working in special ed. I had worked with a group of children, special needs, as a camp counselor, and I really enjoyed that. I had gotten certifications to do swimming lessons, and I saw the transformation of helping children go from I can't to I can. And I found that extremely exciting. And so I thought, okay, special ed. And then I found out it was going to take me how many more years to go into a special ed class. The college I was at didn't have that. I needed to transfer, I would lose credits. I was, a lot of us when we're young are in a real hurry. I was one of those. I
Hmm.
was, there was just this urgency to move on to the next thing. That was me. And so I wasn't willing to do that. Somebody suggested maybe I would do well with physical therapy as another way to work with people, helping them to experience to be able to move in ways that they didn't know they could, to support that. That ended up requiring much more schooling than I'd had. I loved school, but I didn't feel like spending years and years doing it to be able to get to something I wasn't really sure that I wanted. I ended up majoring in history, which 20 years later started to make sense when I got into the world of personal history. Before then, I had basically worked some more clerical jobs, not real professional. I certainly avoided writing and editing like the plague. I was not confident in that. I got started being a professional storyteller, and that got me into the world of education. So I've been sort of skirting the bounds of education without getting certifications to get me into public schools, things like that.
Yeah, it's so interesting how the narrow misses of these earlier careers, psychology, working with people with special needs, and even PT, it's clear, like in a rearview mirror kind of way, that
Mm-hmm.
these all make sense for the person I sort of know you to be today, particularly around your easy walks, like your understanding, your empathy, your
Right.
desire to like find adaptive modes, help people be their best selves within the constraints of whatever the environment is. That it all kind of makes sense, but it sounds like you had quite a path to get there. And you mentioned storytelling was
Mm-hmm.
sort of the entryway to this new life. What led you to storytelling? Because it's not something a lot of people think of as a profession or even as a craft. I mean, to be honest, most of us, storytelling is reading a book out loud, period. So
That's how I started. I
yeah,
I took books to my children's classes and read out loud to them. That was just me being a mom wanting to be involved with my kids' school lives. I was a single mother at that point. I was doing a living as a business cleaning houses, which gave me flexibility for taking care of my small kids. When my son got in school, I told the teacher, "Sure, I'll come and read stories to you." That I wasn't real uncomfortable being in front of groups, but with a book, the book is what's in front of the group. It's not like you're performing really. And then for my daughter in kindergarten, I wanted to do the same thing, but somehow, and it's, you know, what comes out of our mouth. We don't always plan. Instead of saying, "I'll come and read to your student," I said, "I'll come and tell some stories." And they said, "Oh, that would be great." And I thought, what have I just done? And I had a friend an acquaintance I was cleaning for her. She was a professional storyteller. And so I said, "What do I do?" And she said, "Here, this is a real simple story. It's got a little song that gives you a recorded chorus, and it'll become a participatory story. So go from there." I had played guitar from when I was in junior high school, but had never been able to let go of the music. Suddenly, I had what turned out to be two classes of kindergarten. There's about 50 children sitting in front of me. What was I going to do? And so I had to let go of the music, sheet music, and just sing with them and invite them to sing. And I put a couple other stories, like I think it was the Three Little Pigs, and we ended up using an hour. And I was always convinced children would run away from me. I was sure that being a teacher, they would not listen. Much to my surprise, an hour later, 50 kindergartners had sat and helped me tell stories, sang with me, participated, and said, "Are you coming back next month?" The teacher said, "Would you come back next month?" What could I say except sure, and then say, "What in the world am I going to do?" That got me into the storytelling world. Conferences, festivals, workshops, all sorts of things. It was a world I had no idea was out there, and it changed my life.
Marjorie, I love that this show helps me discover origin stories because that's a really fun one. My child is currently, I have a 6 and 8-year-old, so I have a kindergartner.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, they would love it if an adult came and paid
Yes.
attention to them and sang with them and told stories with them and interacted with them, they would eat that up. Now, third graders would be much harder, but like kindergartners, yes,
That's my
100%.
favorite. That's my favorite age, 4 to 6 or so. I have
Yeah,
told the third graders they're on the edge of being jaded.
yeah.
My favorite is about 4 to 6, and
That's cool that you got that reception and that it led you to
oh yeah,
explore this whole new world. And I love also the overlap with you having a business cleaning homes and that you were friendly with one of their clients and that client was a
mhm,
professional storyteller. So you
right,
understood that that world existed and she was able to give you some guidance, some resources to kind of
right.
point you in the right direction for your what you thought was your one and only, your debut and your final show, um, which turned out not to be the case. Um, you also mentioned that you had shied away from writing and editing, and clearly you're an author today, you're an editor today. When did that shift start to happen? It sounds like you got to explore new parts of yourself much later in life than some people might expect. And I love that you're open to that. I hope people listening think about what else they might be able to do no matter what stage of life they're in. So when did that start to emerge as something that you thought was possible?
Oh, thank you for asking. I would not wish anybody to have to follow that path. I sometimes say I was a tough study, that God had a lot of things in plan for me, and this is what it took for me to move past that self consciousness, that fear of writing, that mom on your shoulder saying your grammar isn't right, you haven't done this right. For me, it took everything being taken away from me.
Mm.
Waking up from surgery, from brain surgery to save my life, and discovering that my right side was totally paralyzed. I could not get myself out of bed. I could no longer do the house cleaning that I'd done. My head was completely shaved. Did I want to invite the gaze of an audience to look at me? It changed my life. In that place, there wasn't any much left for me. I had a computer and I could write emails. Emails were new. We were excited about getting one email a day, if you can possibly imagine that. So my children were still young, and I just started writing to family, really, family and some friends, and saying, here's what my kids did today. And they were often funny stories. And at the same time, I was experiencing very slow neurological healing, which was really weird a lot of times. So there were stories that I wrote about that ended up, some of those in my Liturgy of Easy Walks. They were just short essays, basically emails. And people kept writing me back. So, being able to write and get feedback is a real gift. Most writers get very little feedback about their writing. It can be very lonely and isolating in that way. I wasn't thinking about an audience. I wasn't being self-conscious about how I sounded. I was just writing things so people would write me back. And they did. And they said, we wish we lived in your neighborhood. You've got such great neighbors. You've got such fun things going on, which was not how it felt to me. But other people felt that joy that I was finding and sharing. And they also responded very strongly to the struggles that I was processing through my writing of what to do with a changed life. How do you make a life when it's drastically changed?
How old were you when this was all happening?
I was 37.
Wow, so 37, still with young children. You had a plan for how you were going to be living. You thought you had things worked out. You had this medical crisis. You had a plan for dealing with the medical crisis. It sounds like the medical part was sort of dealt with, but the aftermath was just as hard to deal with because it was sort of ongoing. You had
It
to
was a
kind of,
surprise. It was a
yeah,
surprise. Nobody had said you're going to wake up paralyzed.
but it wasn't even
They,
a possibility, right?
it wasn't brought up. No,
Mhm.
it
It
was
wasn't.
not. No.
But now you had to find a new way to communicate. And what I think is interesting about this story and the story about you with the kindergartners is that you found an audience that was very receptive and showed back to you what you were capable of. They shared back that. They reflected back to you what you were giving them, so that
Right.
you sort of got to feel that. And so you also discovered the ability of writing to an audience of one, because that's
Hmm.
what an email really is. Um,
Yep.
but then you were getting, again, positive responses, and it was a time of life when getting an email was actually really exciting.
I
People were,
know.
like, checking it. Remember when it used to announce it each time? "You've got mail," and you're like, "Yay!" Now it's like, "Oh god, turn all that off." Um, who would ever
Right.
think to do that?
Right.
Um, so that was a big shift in your life, and you also earlier talked about your love of the outdoors. I mean, that was sort of clearly a part of your upbringing as well.
Hmm.
When did it start to kinda all come together and you were writing about easy walks? I imagine you initially just started to develop them, and then how did you start sharing that with other people? Like, when did you realize that was even a thing
Hmm.
to share? I mean, there's this your own personal experience of finding the right pathways, and
Hmm.
then there's how do you share it and decide to share it even bigger. So, when did that start to become more and more a part of your life?
I can back up a little bit and explain that where I lived and still live overlooks a lake. We've got woods. It's a quieter area. And so learning to walk again, gaining mobility, we would just walk down to the lake. I would walk down with my kids. I would walk with friends. And that was, um, I spent an awful lot of time at Silver Lake. It was really, I didn't go far. I was very much confined to home, not able to drive with seizures, very, very limited. So I spent a lot of time at Silver Lake. So I just started writing little pieces about what I saw, the wildlife, walking with friends, change of seasons. It really was incredibly gradual. It wasn't anything that I said, oh boy, I'd like to write about disability in the outdoors. I had no clue. In fact, when I started what turned into Easy Walks, it was just some newspaper articles. I really started seriously writing with our local newspaper. It's a great way to get practice writing. You don't get very much feedback, but you get editorial feedback, which is really good. It toughens up your skin to those hard parts of writing. It gets you used to working with an editor. So I wrote these just going out to local trails that I was kind of aware of. I still didn't have a mind that I was writing about disability. I was just focused on the outdoors. I wasn't focused on what my story or my interaction was. And it wasn't until I put these articles on my website, I thought I was going to be a copywriter. I'm not a copywriter. um, and people kept finding my trail articles on my website. And after about the 500th person found my website looking for trail information, I said, I think there's a need for really local trail. How do you get there and what do you do once you're there? And I had gotten into the world of personal history, so I'd learned self publishing. And it made me realize I could make a small book from these. And that's what I did. Probably wasn't the second or third book before I started really embracing my relationship as someone who was mobility challenged with what these stories, these books are about. They're really enabling people with mobility challenges to get information before they go out. So they're not spending really limited information on getting someplace and then finding that it didn't work. I
Mhm.
was doing that work for
Yeah, I mean, it's a concierge level experience for a newer hiker to a new area. I mean, I'm a person who would benefit from that. I remember one time we ended up climbing these boulders, to go up, and I kept worrying about how we were going to go back down them. Like up, I was kind of okay,
Yep.
but down, I wasn't happy at all. We get to the
Yep.
very top, and it turns out there's a little trail you just walk. The down is just a little trail. Like if I had
Yep.
known, the entire trip up would have been more enjoyable. I spent 30 minutes thinking, how are we getting back down? Like,
I know.
seriously, how are we getting
Down
back down?
down is harder.
Yeah, I was
Going
like,
up, it is. It's much more, gravity's going to just take you. And
yeah, but turns out I was fine. I wish. There's another time that I carried a child on my shoulders, not even my own child, up the top of a a lookout, and you were huffing and puffing, and a car pulls up, and I was like, really, really, okay.
Mhm.
Little things like I kind of wish I'd known that in advance.
Oh,
No,
it's too funny.
I'm not the total outdoors guy, right? Like I'm like a dabbler. So I want it to be, reasonable. Like I feel like your books would be my speed. And I think there's
Mhm.
a lot of audiences. Like you said, I mentioned this in the intro, there's parents with young kids, there's the
Mhm.
elderly, there's people with mobility issues. There's stages of life where having access to the outdoors uh, changes, like your needs change. And
Mhm.
so what you maybe could have done before, you could be a marathoner, but now you have young kids. Like you're not
Right.
going to do the same thing that you did before. So I love that you broaden your audience, but you're also now, it sounds like you're starting to really tap into speaking about disability in a bigger sense. How has that changed for you? Where do you now speak that you maybe would never have thought to speak before?
Yeah, that really changed with publishing the My Liturgy of Easy Walks, because that whole focus was learning to live with a changed life. And just as a quick aside, there's also people that use these trail books who are recently injured. So
Mm,
that's a sudden change. And also, there are a number of people who are visually impaired who have told me that these books are helpful to them. So that's just an aside. But it really was, I had to embrace disability advocacy with being able to share about my liturgy of easy walks, reclaiming hope in a world turned upside down. That's that's it.
as you started to build this out and it became, you were speaking, writing, maybe doing some coaching, like you started to build into a business. How did you start to imagine that? Were there people in your life that were entrepreneurial, that, I mean, you'd had a business cleaning homes, so you clearly had that business sense, but
Mm-hmm.
what other information did you have to have as the kind of work you did change? And what communities did you seek out to kind of fill in the gaps and give you some sense of what was around the corner?
Uh, I would trace that back to my storytelling, because I started doing workshops, and they've always ended up being participatory workshops. They're not lectures. I don't lecture. I interact, I invite, I give people challenges, go off in pairs, come back, tell us. For me, that's the easy part, because I don't have to sit there and come up with content for an hour. You know, it's collaborative, and that's, I think, a theme that I've spent through the storytelling participatory. I learned that through the storytelling community. I've also, I for me, it all comes back to the storytelling. I learned how to present in front of an audience. I learned that audiences don't want you to fail. It's very uncomfortable to see someone floundering on stage in front of you. It's really awkward. They want you to do well, and then they can enjoy, they can relax too. I really, I put a tremendous amount of what I put to work as a presenter with these books, with this writing, back to the 14 years of conferences, workshops, and performances that I spent all that time doing.
It's
Anybody who's performing, you learn from.
It's an incredible resource for learning because their focus as generally storyteller community is about engagement, as opposed to, you know, a professor who's really like, they're kind of trained to do more lecture style, read, you know,
Mhm.
read the slides, read your white paper, and then we'll discuss it after. So I'm glad you had that sort of foundation, because then as you had new content, you still had the old skills for how to present that new content and to make it dynamic and interesting. And you know, are you speaking now as a disability rights advocate? Like, what role are you playing today with your easy walks? Like,
Mhm.
how has this been shaped, both your identity on this, but also, you know, where you show up as a resource?
I've been targeting senior centers for the more recent. I actually collaborated with a couple. Um, the husband is visually impaired, and they did all the field work for me for my most recent local Easy Walks book. They went out and did it all, and I was more the editor who put it all together. So for their book, it's not that far from where I live, but it was still harder for me to get out to do that field work. Now I'm going to those communities and contacting their senior centers, because I figure that's a real target market for me, and people who need to be encouraged that they don't have to just sit and get entertained. They can still go out and be active within their own abilities.
That's awesome. How is that being received?
It's being received well. Some of it, winter is a tough time. Um, Scheduling is a challenging time. I haven't put as much energy into it
Mhm,
as others. I've got other editing clients. I can only do so much.
mhm, mhm.
So I'm still finding the balance between helping my editing clients, doing that outreach for senior centers. And I've also got some books I'm working with family that I'm collaborating with family members to do something focused on some family reunions we've had. Another book working with my sister who's been researching the 1,000 letters we have from our great great grandmother and making those accessible for the story. Interestingly, she was a single mother and was a performer. Back when all this started, there weren't other performers in our family, and here she was 100 years ago out on the Victorian stage, traveling cross country by train to support her very young children when she was widowed.
Wow. It's like a cliffhanger story right there. Do you wanna know more about it? You are a
Mm-hmm.
multi-passionate entrepreneur. I recognize that in you, as I am one as well. I love that you've got your fingers in all these different pots, and you're just trying to sort of balance them. I think of it as, spinning plates. Different than juggling. Juggling, you only have one focus, keep the ball in the air. Spinning
Mm-hmm.
plates requires multifocal, knowing exactly when to step up, step back, and that's the piece that you're doing right now. When you're thinking about the community you've been able to build around you, it sounds like you've got people from lots of different communities and networks that you're participating in on a regular basis. You've got sort of your inner circle of people that you know you're going to stay in touch with. But then you've got that second and sort of third tier or third layer
Mm-hmm.
out, the people that you might see once a year at a conference, or the people that I don't know, maybe you worked with them 5 years ago, but you haven't had a reason to since. But you really enjoy each other's company. That's kind of the given on this. How do you think about nurturing and sustaining those kinds of weaker connections? Any habits,
Mm-hmm.
philosophies, practices?
The pandemic changed a tremendous much for all of us. Um, I had already been staying home a lot. It was almost entertaining to watch people's panic of I'm home all the time, and basically it was been there, done that. Uh, it was I was already pretty set up to be at home. That being said, being able to interact more easily, suddenly everyone wanted to use Zoom. Suddenly I didn't have to go out and do the physically taxing ways of interacting with people. Since the pandemic, I have not had a single seizure. Before
Wow.
then, they were breakthrough seizures, but often enough that I had to be very mindful. I have still not had a seizure since the pandemic, but I have really scaled back the in-person events that I do. It actually suits my physical needs a lot better. That being said, I had this small Facebook group that had to do with outdoors and walking. And with the pandemic, suddenly that was what people could do, and they were desperate for information. I was getting 100 people every day asking to join this group. It was local, it was giving information. I was putting out safety information, what places were closed, here's what you can do, here's a place you can go, but don't go middle of the day, go at morning or evening, supper time. It was really advocating for people who were lost and didn't know what to do. Their only outlet was outdoors and they were bewildered. So at this point, it's up to about 13,000 people. I don't provide all of the content anymore. It's a lot. And so the members have gotten so that they know they are welcome. It's a private group. You just have to be asked to be admitted. But I've been really clear about this is not just a pretty picture group. If you want to be part of this group, we ask that you be useful. Tell us where it is. Give us a website. Give us the name. Tell us what state it's in. Tell us what town it's in. Tell us what's there. Tell us what the trail surfaces are like.
Mm-hmm.
That's overlooked by practically every trail publication I have ever seen. They don't look at trail surfaces. And for any of us with have any of these limitations that you were talking about, trail surfaces are make or break. You either
Yeah.
can or you can't. And if you don't know, you go and find out, and then you find out it doesn't work. And that's really crappy.
You were in the right place at the right time. You had already been developing these skills of both being at home and also exploring the outdoors in a safe way. Again, I'm not the big outdoorsy guy, but I will tell you, my family and I went for some walks in the
Mm-hmm.
woods in the
Yep.
pandemic because that's kind of was the highlight of our day. I remember being
Yeah.
really early in the pandemic to the point where people were crossing us in the path, and we all very carefully stepped aside and turned away because we didn't know how easily the virus could be transmitted. So we were all giving each other wide berth. You know, I remember my kids, like there'd be dogs with families, and my kids, didn't have experience with dogs, and like seeing them interact with these dogs in these crowds, and just that whole like this was about as much human interaction as we were gonna get those first few
Right.
months when we were all really. I mean, this is when we were getting groceries delivered, wiping things down outside before we brought it into our
Exactly.
house.
I
Yeah,
know.
so I think having a resource like your group, and I'll make sure to get the link to put in the show notes so we can
Mm-hmm.
add that as a resource for others who live in your area of Massachusetts. But I think other resources like this are really helpful.
I actually changed the group. It was nearby. It was Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and nearby. I'm almost in Rhode Island. And the group became so big that I actually changed the name to Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and beyond.
Wow.
So,
So you're getting people from all over. That's fantastic. People who want to
and and,
learn
and
about
we
trails.
we write about I write about our travels out west to Utah, to Tennessee, to my grandkids, to Canada, to Nova Scotia, to Newfoundland.
Hmm.
So I said, I can't put all this in if it's so nearby. It's
Right.
kind of a
And
disconnect,
beyond.
right?
You and I connected, I believe. Did we connect through Dorothy Wilhelm initially?
We did.
Yeah.
Dorothy, yeah, she's wonderful.
So I had a chance to interview Dorothy. She's in the Pacific Northwest. She was episode 210. She's the founder of the National Speakers Association Pacific Northwest chapter, one of the founders. And she, at 90 years old, is still speaking,
I know.
very engaged, producing podcasts and radio shows. I mean, she's just a dynamo. So yeah, it's really interesting how she's also brought together a community of people. Um, how have you started to seek out those kinds of spaces as they popped up? It sounds like the pandemic offered you possibilities that weren't there because we weren't thinking virtually, and suddenly access
Right.
meant something different.
Suddenly I was making presentations across New England. People were approaching me to do Zoom Easy Walks presentations. It was challenging, and that meant I had to reach out to people in those areas and have them help me, send me pictures, tell me what was there. But I had an outline at that point. I was clear that an easy walk is not too many roots, not too many rocks, relatively level with firm footing, and something of interest along the way. Once I finally, it was longer than you would think, was able to articulate that, I could then just give that to people and say, help me. I can't get to where you are, but I have this presentation. Would you be able to help me make it happen? And people were very,
Amazing.
very kind. And so I did that. People have really gone back to in person. I don't really have that option right now, but it was really nice for a year or two. I was getting paid for virtual presentations. It was a little challenging, but I did it and I
Mhm.
really enjoyed it. So,
That's awesome. What other networking practices do you have besides this big Facebook group that kind of blew up for
right.
you?
Dorothy, really, I mean, I've gotten editing clients through Dorothy's community there, the book doctors. She does her morning coffee things. Trying to think. I get a bunch of newsletters. I will interact with people. I'm always just looking for ideas.
Hmm.
I skim because I can't do all of it. Trying to think. I have really cut down on my networking. Uh, just in person, I do very limited. I'm on our historical commission in town, so I'll do that. I started a writers group 5 years ago with my neighbor, and we meet monthly. We've been meeting monthly for 5 years now and haven't missed a month. So we've got people who have started out in our group and are now publishing a book, one next month. It's so exciting.
There's so
So
many things you just said there I want to break down. I mean, one is volunteering around a cause you care about. The second is bringing people together around a common interest, like the writers group,
mhm,
and having consistency, and so people can build relationships over time because you consistently
right,
host and create that space. The other is, excuse me, attending other, excuse me, attending other people's events that attract the kind of people you want to spend time with that also
mhm,
could lead to business for you. And while virtual is sort of scaled back, has not gone away completely because
right,
people do realize that it is an access issue, and you can bring more people more easily together regardless of
right.
geography and limitations like that. So there are circumstances where a meeting in the state capitol, which could now be a Zoom call, people are like, huh, why are we all going to go to the state capitol?
Right.
Which may not be conveniently located in the center, right? Like it's like
Mhm.
could be hours for most people. So it's really interesting how we're rethinking that. The clients I have that are still doing virtual, like California WIC Association, for instance, um, they're spanning a huge geography, but now they're able to bring in both more participants and speakers from around the world. So they're getting more value and they're getting all their sessions recorded, which allows them to make them available for replay really easily, allowing for more certification credit. So it's interesting how all of that became possible because we all were sort of forced to discover the online component, and now it's just an option. Um,
Right.
and we don't know what's around the corner. I feel like you're now set up so that if something were to happen, like the resources you've laid out are the ones that we will need again one day.
Right.
If not because of a health crisis, because aging is something we all hope to do. We all hope to find a way to age gracefully and age in place and have access to the outdoors. I really love everything you're putting together. We're
Thank
about
you.
to get to my favorite wrap up question. Before we do, we're gonna hear a quick word from our sponsor. All right, here we are. It's a year from now, okay? You remember, or I remember, that we had this conversation about a year ago, and I'm going to be asking you what's been going on. Like, what are we celebrating? What are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
Wow. What I right now am most looking forward to is more travel. And my husband has really made that possible for me. He got a camper for us. He's made it so it's comfortable and safe for me and makes sure that I don't trip and fall on things when we're in these campgrounds traveling cross country. We have several plans, hopefully, to get to Yellowstone again. We went there, I don't know, 2009, and said we have to come back. And I believe we're making time this spring, I hope. And also making time to see grandkids in Tennessee. They're way too far away from New England. And I really look forward to that. So I would say travel is a big priority for me. Helps that I'm a travel writer. So that's something that all fits in. And you never know. I expect there will be some surprises by next year.
I love the life you created for yourself, Marjorie, and the
Thank you.
fact that these things that you're looking forward to, they all seem possible because you will create them. And having the writing go alongside all the travel sounds amazing as well. Can't wait to celebrate all that with you. How can
Thank
people
you.
find you and follow your work?
Uh, MarjorieTurner.com is basically that's where you can find me. Um, yeah, there's MarjorieTurner.com, and there's all sorts of links there.
Brilliant.
My Facebook group, the Easy Walks Massachusetts and beyond. I do belong to another community I forgot to mention to you if
Mm,
I could squeeze that in. It's based on the book Write Useful Books. It's for nonfiction writers, which is me, and it's a growing community all of authors. And it's really remarkable. We meet together twice, 3 times a week, writing accountability. So these
amazing.
are people from across the world. So I wouldn't be able to meet with them. It's all Zoom. It's all relationships. I've gotten business out of it. I've gotten strong relationships out of it. It's a priority.
That's awesome that you found all these great spaces, and I look forward to having more of those happen. And I appreciate that you've been popping into the communities that I host as well. I love all the links, the resources you mentioned, including your LinkedIn, your Instagram, your Facebook group, your website. We'll list them all on the show notes at ontheschmooze.com. Marjorie, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been really great.
You are so welcome. Thank you so much for all the work you're doing, Robbie. I really appreciate it.